Welcome to episode 5 of Hammerween, and indeed episode 1 of Vampire Weekends. So, 8 weekend days in October, and 8 non-Dracula vampire films from Hammer. So, we're going to be covering all of those throughout this month. First one, 1963's Kiss of the Vampire. Interesting one to start with. So we'll just throw ourselves into Vampire Weekends. It's the name of a pop band. If you didn't know that, it's on you, not me. Wonderful, fascinating setup at the start that really hooks you, where an old man is seen on a hilltop at a funeral. Um, is it Van Helsing? No, because Peter Cushing's not in the poster, but is it? Um, and he comes down while the mass is being said. And we realize, oh, it's Clifford Evans from The Prisoner. He takes the shovel. Also, it's his daughter's funeral. Okay. He takes the shovel as the coffin's about to be lowered into the ground, and he rams it through the coffin, right through the body, and blood spurts everywhere, all over the places. Ugh. Blech. Some proper Kensington gore from Hammer. And we dissolve into the coffin and see that his daughter, inside the coffin, had turned into a vampire as she lay in state. Cue credits. So, a cold opening for a Hammer film, quite an interesting one, quite a fascinating idea, something they hadn't done before, which always good to try new things. Then we go into the main body of the plot. So, a young honeymooning couple, um, who are impossible like Brad and Janet from Rocky Horror for the first 10, 15 minutes. Gerald and Marianne, played by the wonderful Edward D'Souza from the only episode of Doctor Who ever not to feature the Doctor, Mission to the Unknown. Edward D'Souza, he was the star of that episode in 1965. So the young couple who are honeymooning, it's clearly a bit later than most of the Hammer Gothics because there's a motor car, which impresses people enough to realize it's early on in the motor car days. But it's clearly not just after the invention. So we're maybe 1905, 1910, something like that. Gerald and Marianne, they break down and go to the first house they come to, which turns out to be an inn, and they're told, "You're wet." So again, just like Rocky Horror, exact dialogue, exact setup. "You're wet, you best come in." And saying it's an inn, well, "Could we have a room, please?" Which completely shocks the innkeeper. Why would you want to stay here? Never mind. Never mind. Don't want to tell you too much of the rest of the film at this point, says the innkeeper. We need to keep some surprises for later on. But there's a real kind of, well, something's clearly afoot with vampires, given the name of the film, the fact that we saw a vampire at the start, and now there's this part of town, or maybe this part of the country that even the innkeeper themselves, they're shocked to have custom. Why would anyone come to this godforsaken, never mind, give me your 5 marks and we'll call it quits? So they set up base in this pleasant little homespun inn, at which point they receive a communique from Dr. Ravna, who's a kind of high class sort, and his 2 children, Carl and Tanya. They go and visit them because they get invited over. I'll send the horse and carriage, and you can come and pay me a visit because I am upper class, and clearly so are you, as you have a motor car. So come and visit me. Don't hang about with the peasants. And pretty much this this is about enough to make them firm friends because they are indeed all upper class, so they must be friendly to each other. So hey, some things never change, yeah. So Gerald and Marianne are at the mansion, the castle, the Bavarian castle, as you can see behind me, similar, of Dr. Ravna, and his progeny, and they make firm friends and depart. But before they do, They're invited to a ball at the same premises. It's one of these films that really takes place over two locations, really. The Pretty much the inn, the hotel, and the castle of Dr. Ravna, and that's just about it. And there's never really an indication of how far the distances are between each other, mostly because it's all done at Bray Studios, so it's actually about 50 yards between each location, but still. So it takes place between those two. So they go back to the inn, get ready for the ball, travel to the ball, have a wonderful time. It's a masquerade ball, so everyone's hidden behind all sorts of grotesque masks and whatnot. And that's being used with a bit of subterfuge to split the couple up. So the mask that's given to Gerald, the young groom, is the same as the mask that's going to be worn by young Carl, the son of Dr. Ravna, in an attempt to split the couple up and get them confused on the dance floor and whatnot and separate them. So they do, and Marianne, young bride, is taken into a separate room. She thinks, oh, what's this? We're going to have our second wedding night. This could be fun. No, mask off, it's Carl. And if you look behind you, sweetheart, there's Dr. Ravna, and he's got the fangs out. And in a very sexualized, of course, the vampiric aspect is always sexualized, but here more than most, in a very sexualized way, he lays her down on the bed and then takes a good chomp at her neck with the assistance of his son, which is a bit weird when you're talking about sexualized aspects, but nonetheless. While this is all going on, though, what do you do about Edward de Souza, about Gerald Harcourt? You just get him absolutely rat-assed. So he's completely drunk. To be fair, they've spiked him. They're giving him some funky champagne. So they've roofied him basically. And he's out for the count. When he wakes up the next morning, he says, oh, what a headache. Oh, Jesus, I am hanging. I am out the game. Where's Marianne? And young Carl, the son of Dr. Ravna, says, who? Dr. Ravna himself says, you came here yourself, man. What are you talking about? You made a complete arse of yourself getting drunk, but you came here yourself. They throw him out. So off Gerald goes back to the hotel across the road, and says, do you know, they tried to convince me that my wife never existed. The innkeeper says, you came here yourself, sir. Down, down, down. So it's all about Lady Vanishes kind of thing from this point for a good 15 minutes. So Gerald tears the place apart. In his rooms, with his wife, all her stuff has gone. There's no indication that she ever was there. Her signature isn't in the book anymore. The fate, the signature that's his and removed hers. All the stuff from the drawers completely gone. Everything, all trace. Nobody will admit to having seen poor Marianne. And they're trying to gaslight Edward de Souza, Gerald, into believing that, no, you came here yourself. Shut up. All except for one person who makes his noble return to affairs after not doing much for the last 40, 50 minutes. Clifford Evans, who at the very start, as Professor Zimmer, drove the shovel through his daughter at the funeral at the very start of the film. He's your slight Van Helsing stand-in, and I say that intentionally slight. We'll go into that more in the review. And he says, no, no, you did come here with your wife. I've been in the hotel as well. I might be drinking a fair bit, but believe me, your wife was here. And by total coincidence, I'm out to kill this cult of vampires because everyone you saw at that ball, they're all vampires. And they all organize a big cult of vampires. They're not singular vampires like other Hammer movies. So, tell you what, stick with me, kid. We'll go and get your wife back and we'll kill all the vampires. So, I don't really think I need to avoid plot spoilers because You can write the script from here on in, really. Once I tell you one element, black magic. So it's no surprise to say that Professor Zimmer conjures up some black magic with some complete mumbo jumbo that relies on total coincidence. It's just as well that your wife was stolen today because Capricorn is in orbit with Jupiter and blah 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 blah. I hate that mumbo. I hate astronomy. Absolute nonsense. Or astrology? No, astronomy. The one that's Sagittarius and Capricorn. I hate all that nonsense. As if 1/12 of the population have exactly the same day. Anyway, so he says, well, because of this alignment of the stars, I've got old books here, and I'm going to say some spells, put some chalk on the floor, and conjure something up. Bish bash bosh. Don't worry, we'll sort those vampires out and hopefully get your wife back. Stick with me. And from there on in, things happen extremely fast towards the end. Again, if you really don't want to get spoiled, then close your ears for 30 seconds. But from then on in, he conjures up just a biblical plague of locusts, but they're instead of locusts, they're bats. So they're literal vampire bats, as in these vampires bats eat vampire. So there's a whole sequence, a quite lengthy sequence of this cult of vampires, all 30 of them clad in white like a cult, being butchered by these vampire bats. And you start to feel quite sorry for them because it goes on for so long in such a bloody way. It's quite bizarre how it kind of flips it. You do start to feel sorry for them. And because they've killed the head vampire, Dr. Ravna, the Marianne is freed from his clutches, and hey ho, everything's good. We're all back to normal. The hotel can, the innkeeper, the reason he lied all along, his daughter was being held hostage by Dr. Ravna, so everyone had an excuse to act the way they were. Blah 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 blah. Roll credits. Right. Nice. Sorted. What do we think of it though? Well, there's a few issues. There's some great stuff. It's a gorgeous looking film. Originally intended very, very embryonically. At its embryonic stage, to be a Dracula sequel with Peter Cushing. So the third for him, second for Christopher Lee. Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee obviously did not appear here, so it was completely rewritten. So in some places you'll hear it said that, well, this would have been Dracula 3. No, it was completely rewritten after that. So don't fall for that. The black magic aspect of it, Peter Cushing had already refused to do black magic in Brides of Dracula, so he wouldn't have done it here. And Dracula was a singular vampire who maintained some brides, but was very animalistic. Dr. Ravna, again, it's done as more of a societal affair type thing. His vampirism, where it's almost a comment on society and class and whatnot. So that Dracula wouldn't work in that scenario. He doesn't work as the host to 30 people and having a groovy time, um, organizing a shindig. You can't imagine Dracula sitting down thinking, right, what mask shall I wear tonight? No, no, none of that kind of stuff. So it doesn't work as a Dracula sequel. Taking it on its own merits, there are still elements. Noel Wellman, who plays Dr. Ravna as, the Dracula stand-in, if you will, he's very bad. He doesn't have any menace to him. He's clearly going for more charm, which is fine. A different interpretation is fine. But in the documentary on the Blu-ray, it's mentioned that he said that he thought it was prudent to go for a very one-note performance because Dr. Ravna would react the same in all situations because he's such an old, wizened vampire. On film, that isn't interesting to watch. He reacts to everything with exactly the same manner. Good news, bad news, happy news, sad news. That's no, 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 no. What a bad decision for him to make as an actor. Clifford Evans, ostensibly as your Van Helsing stand-in, but again, Van Helsing wouldn't do the black magic stuff. And he is a drunkard as well because of the loss of his daughter at the start of the film. So you can't just slot Van Helsing into affairs. Van Helsing might have killed that girl at the start, but he would have done so in a more methodical manner, coming later and digging up the body or something. He wouldn't just turn up at the grave, say, while all the mourners are there and just ram a shovel through it. So different. Our young couple, um, especially Edward D'Souza, very well played. You feel sympathy. You especially feel sympathy when he's being gaslit into, what you're talking about. You never had a wife. What are you talking about? You that frustrates you. So that comes through the screen, and you start to think, oh, how's it gonna solve this one? It's all just a bit fast towards the last act. I think there's a bit of a recurring theme in this series. There's a truly great film here, but it's just not quite happening. Um, him meeting, I should say, Gerald meeting Professor Zimmer, and Professor Zimmer saying, "Don't worry, tonight's the exact night I'm going to do my conjuring. It only happens once every X amount of years, and tonight's the night." That's all a bit pat. It's a bit twee that it's going to happen in that very night that Edward D'Souza needs it to happen. And then when it does happen, it's far too easy. Clifford Evans does his chalk circle, and basically the vampires are toast from then on, the minute after the incantation. There's no struggle, there's no confrontation. It just happens. The vampires are just mauled and massacred by these bats. So you don't have that scene of, like Van Helsing facing off against Dracula, the mortal enemies who'll literally be reincarnated over and over to keep facing each other. You don't have that scene here. They just unleash the plague of vampire bats and passively watch on as affairs resolve themselves. So I think you need the actual characters to be involved more. You need a more interesting antagonist than Dr. Ravna, who needs to have more of a cult-like leader mentality. Because I just can't imagine this guy as the head of anything. I mean, he's bland. Post Charles Manson, I think they would have done something a bit more interesting with a cult leader leading a coven of vampires. But everybody else plays it fine. I mean, it was written by Anthony Hines as John Elder, one of the pseudonyms that Hammer used. Directed by Don Sharp, who directs the hell out of it. It's a wonderful bit of direction. And one of the most impressive parts of the film visually is actually the vampire bat attacks. You'd think that in 1963, rubber bats attacking would look terrible. They actually look really good for the time. They look really good, a lot more impressive than they have any right to do. They're much higher quality than just the Halloween ones that most B movies would use, for example. They actually do look realistic enough to let me look past them. And again, I felt sorry for the vampires at the end because they had no chance in defending themselves. And most of them have just been turned by Dr. Ravna. They're not bad people. And again, that's an aspect you could have played up as well. Um, when uh, when Edward de Souza is gaslit and told you were never married, what are you talking about? Get out of my house. Dracula would have just killed him at that point, whereas Dr. Ravna lets him go. So there's again a bit more of a class to this vampire society here. More can be done with that, where they are a separate race now and want to be recognized as such. More can be done with that, but it's not. It's just not. Ugh, frustrating. I mean, I don't do ratings. If I was to give it one, it would be 7.5 or something because it's got all the elements there. They just need developed more. And in a Hammer film, which is going to be part of a double feature, there's just not enough time to quite do that. Um, but I still think there were smarter ways to do it, even in the runtime that we got. Hey ho. Tomorrow, we're going to jump all the way forward to the 1970s with what some people regard as the last truly great Hammer film or Hammer horror from the original run. We're going to be talking 1974's Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter. But for today, for episode 5 of Hammerween and for episode 1 of Vampire Weekends, I bid you good night.